Hi, this is Liqian Ren, Director of Modern Alpha Wisdom Tree ETFs. Welcome to China of Tomorrow podcast series, where we navigate China, India, Japan, and the broader emerging markets with members of Wisdom Tree and other industry leaders. Today is June 9th, 2025, start of the summer. Today, I'm going to quickly comment on two pieces of economic information out of China, which is CPI and export, and then quickly discuss the ongoing U.S. China negotiations. It's not just trade, not tariff. I wouldn't say it's called a trade deal now because it's really much more complex. It's more about supply chain, I would say, kind of negotiations. So we'll go into detail of that. And for those of you who have found our podcast to be useful, we'd love for you to subscribe to us on Spotify and Apple. They're also available on our website, wisdomtree.com. And I am also available on Twitter if you have direct comments. First on CPI and export. The two pieces of data really didn't offer too much of a surprise. China continued to be in a very low or kind of close to zero disinflationary environment. The headline month over month or year over year is hovering around minus 0.1 or 0.2, depends on, you calculate it. Now, the Stats Bureau did put a spin on it and says it's the core CPI that should be really highlighted. In that sense, it's true. The core CPI is actually positive, close to 0.1% month over month and close to 0.6% year over year. So from core CPI's point of view, it's slightly above zero. From the headline CPI's point of view, it's slightly below zero. CPI data actually in China is one of the less manipulated data. People can disagree, obviously, but compared to other data, it's actually it has a little bit more quality to it. And the government's manipulation of the CPI data is less than the other data. So I will say, I think the fact that actually the government put beginning of the year goal of 2% or 3% CPI, and in the last 1 or 2 years, it's never reached the goal, and which is very different from GDP. The government sets a goal, and usually it will try to do a lot of things, whether it's data manipulation or whether it's actually, quicker release some stimulus so that the number is not that far away from China's goal that's set every year in the beginning of the March. But the CPI data, it seems like the government is not as manipulative of the data, and that gives people a little bit closer view of what's going on in China, which is domestic demand is still very weak. But on the other hand, the core demand is not collapsing, and it's not necessarily getting worse. It's bad, it's not good, but it's also not like getting into significant worse situation. So that is what is CPI, and I think the government acknowledges, and it probably will do a little bit stimulus money, try to keep the core CPI to be above zero. In terms of export, it's very interesting with the U.S. China close to embargo in April, and then May, a lot of U.S. companies trying to get back shipping. But I think either the shipping is not necessarily very smooth, and also U.S.'s tariff system is also not necessarily smooth, because I've heard some friends whose stuff has been stuck in, at the customs for a long time. And also because the tariff on China is still close to 40%, it's at least 20 to 30% higher than other countries. So the direct export to the U.S. For May is, it's really, really low. It's minus, 30% compared to a year before. That is on top of, minus 20% in April. So I think the direct U.S. China trade are going to continue to shrink. China is going to try to use so-called transshipment or trans production, which is going into Southeast Asia to produce and then export to the U.S. So you can see that China's export to all the other regions are going up significantly, except significantly in the U.S. Now that is sometimes it's kind of interesting that if you go to a clothing shop, you see a lot of clothes that made in Japan. No, sorry, made in Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh, or Indonesia. Sometimes Malaysia. I don't see Indonesia as much. So a lot of those are, produced by Chinese firms that moved away from China into these regions to take advantage of lower tariff to the U.S. And also American firms are also, according to FT report, that lobbying U.S. And President Trump's team for lower tariff from Vietnam. So whether that is a middle ground that the U.S. can accept, that a significant chunk of production will be moved away from China into Southeast Asia, and to get to and my joke to my daughter when we go shopping is that actually if you look at some of the clothing that's made in China, generally it's probably the higher quality and higher price and a little bit higher difficult to construct pieces because the more complex and pieces are still made in China. China does have a lot of very skilled sewing skill, and other countries, including India, their skill, which they will improve, just like China improved. But for now, if I love shopping in clothing stores, so when you go in and you can look, that depends on where they're made, and then you can actually kind of made a guess whether the piece is easier to construct. So that's the export. It's not necessarily hugely surprising. China export, still growing, and then the import is struggling mainly because domestically, Chinese economy is struggling. So that's the two pieces of information, and then the third is probably the more important one. Actually, not just for Chinese equity, but also important for the U.S. equity, is that how is the U.S. China negotiations are going. First, for those who have not been paying this attention, I think the background is now it's getting clear that China is using the rare earth card. China dominates the export industry of rare earths. While in exchange, U.S. probably will have to give something. Whether I think the two main thing is the technology export control, and then the other is Taiwan. In terms of Taiwan, it's not very clear because I think today as we speak, the negotiation team from the U.S. side is Secretary Lamnick and Secretary Bessent, and then the trade representative Jameson. From the Chinese side is Vice Premier He Lifeng and Trade Representative Li Chenggang, and the Vice Minister of Finance, which is the Treasury equivalent, Liao Ming. The three person from Chinese side are quite experienced and also capable, particularly the two, Li Chenggang and Liao Ming, who are career bureaucrats, but also quite capable ability-wise. And the Vice Chair, President, she gave Vice Premier He Lifeng the boundaries already, so he will be there to set the tone of what China is willing to give. So the U.S. side has the three. So I think most of the current negotiation will be more on tech than Taiwan, because Taiwan also from the U.S. side, it's really not that much to give in terms of probably also from Chinese side, probably a little bit more interested in the tech section um, area in exchange for rare earths. The rare earths, for those who are not familiar, the material is not um, rare. US has a lot of it, but the processing of it is um, very polluting and also very low margin. You don't make it. China doesn't make a lot of money. But on the other hand, it's an input for a lot of US companies. Really, like sometimes you wonder why US does not have a Rare Earth Act instead of CHIPS Act, because in terms of the money involved is small, but in terms of the importance for US industry, rare earths is no less than chips. I think most people do not realize this, but within a lot of both from US and China, these reports, it's pretty well known that China has this rare earth card. Um, Particularly in the last 10 years, China has strengthened its hand. Um, but I think in 2018, China didn't really play the card. And this time, either it felt there is really, no other place to back down except, retaliate and also play the rare earth card. Again, we're not going to go and guess why, but this is what's likely to happen is that China does hold several cards and US also hold several cards. So it's not that US doesn't have something, but again, the situation is a big change. I think before January, China was loathing to use these minerals as a negotiation, but now both sides really get, the hands, or you can say like get the get the hands ready, get the cards ready, and then they are gonna deal. So this is the current situation. Our baseline, which is on my baseline, we don't necessarily 100% agree within all my colleagues, and everybody has a different view, is that I think there will be a deal, because it's already clear that President Trump will go visit China, and then President Xi will come to US for a state visit. To get something for this kind of state visit, you need a deal. So the process could be very ups and downs, but ultimately I do think there will be a deal. Now, how much of this deal? I think the pressing issue is really what is US willing to give for the rare earth situation, because China does have really a very upper hand on that. And US has not really invested in significant way to make that. You can say it's constrained by politics. I'm also myself trying to understand why US, does not have more significant strategic investments, but it requires money. It requires people to be willing to forego some of the other money or tax cut or spending to put the money in there to subsidize local production. So are people willing to do that? So all these is really dependent on US politics. So I think right now, if you are looking at the US-China negotiations before, you mainly research what's going on in China, what's the message, sometimes you'll get information from their channel of communication, but also what US side is doing is also very important, like what US is willing to give. I know a lot of people seem to does not like Secretary Howard Lutnick, but I actually, after my learning of the US negotiation information, I think he holds a lot of cards. Like he has President Trump's trust, and then a lot of his positions. What does he think of the US China deal should look like? Actually, matters a lot. So I wouldn't dismiss Secretary Howard's views. I know some people kind of make jokes about him, but I really think what he thinks, even on the part of, is how much U.S. is willing to give Vietnam a lower tariff rate, knowing that it will be used by China as a kind of a, because the Vietnam and China is really close, and China is comfortable, using Vietnam as a way for continued companies moving to Vietnam. I think China feels that it still have some influence over supply chain if those clothing shops or other manufacturing moved into the uh, close to countries like Vietnam and Malaysia. Because Philippines right now is a different story. But the top ones is Malaysia, Vietnam, and then Cambodia. So I think China probably do not feel as like kind of comfortable. I wouldn't say prevented to move to India. It's I think mainly because right now India and China is in a strategic competition as well, and it's also really far away from China. So if from China's point of view, moving to like Southeast Asian, like the so-called Asian countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, or Vietnam is slightly easier for China. So will that be a middle ground for the U.S.? It all remain to be seen. I think the important thing is there will be a deal, but how big is the deal and how quick and fast each side negotiate, I think it's probably still going to be a lot of ups and downs. I I wouldn't think it's going to be quick. But the problem right now is that because everything is really decided by President Trump and President Xi, so it's really subject to whatever these two guys are thinking. If they really want a deal, both sides very quick, then next week or 2 weeks from now, it's completely possible. That's why I say right now it's difficult to short the market because you could have these very top two people just quickly say something and then can significantly impact the market one way or another. Thank you. And we look forward to discuss more with so much China US headlines. And the impact of all this is not just impacting Chinese equity, but also impacting other countries' equities as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see how both countries resolve the differences.